The D-Clan has been one of the greatest mysteries in One Piece history, but I think I just cracked the entire case, and this whole video will show you the truth, what the D truly stands for, and why it's so significant to the entire world of One Piece. Not to mention, Oda has done such a good job with involving the Will of D into the story that it's been involved since chapter 1. Now, the reason why I was able to figure out the true meaning of D was me rereading Wano. We learned so much about Joy Boy, Sun God Nika, a bit on the Void Century, and even Laugh Tale specifically. All the major mysteries in One Piece started getting big clues in Wano, so I started questioning myself. What about the Will of D? I mean, we got an appearance from a new member in Rocksteady Zebek, but I'm talking about a true meaning. Something that can easily help further advance what we already know, and that's when it finally hit me. The Dawn. And no, before you guys even try to pull it, I can already feel your eyes rolling. My answer for what D stands for isn't exactly Dawn, as some people in the community have already theorized. So chill out real quick. But to be fair, Dawn is in fact a piece to the entire puzzle, and a pretty big one at that. Like I said before, that the true meaning of D has been around since chapter 1, so has Dawn. If you literally go back to the very first chapter, you'll see the title itself and understand. Romance Dawn. There's also the fact that Luffy is from Dawn Island. Dawn refers to the beginning of a new era, a new phase of life, and we also see Oda start off with Roger's execution, the beginning of the greatest pirate era in history. What made me realize all of these connections early on about Dawn was Wano, and more specifically, Toki's prophecy. Toki's prophecy has many pieces of symbolism, with the 9 shadows, the moon, and how in due time, Wano will be liberated. But yet again, we find our first puzzle piece at the center of this prophecy, the Dawn. With Toki saying that we shall soon know the brilliance of the dawn, it truly made me reflect. And then I saw it for what it was. Toki isn't talking to us about the dawn. This is Oda directly talking to us, telling us that soon enough, once we see the liberation of Wano and the defeat of Kaido, we'll understand the brilliance of the dawn. Now, it's funny that as soon as Wano ends, Luffy becomes Sun God Nika and helps liberate Wano. Oda says that he's gearing to prepare us all for the final saga, as if he's been waiting for us to see Luffy's Nika form before showing us the final phase of this entire story. So naturally, I start trying to understand the underlying connections between Dawn and Luffy's new form. At first, it was easy. It's obviously the sun, as the dawn is literally the phase of how the sun comes up, and Luffy is the new sun rising into the One Piece world. But I thought back to each and every single D-Clan member, and that's what truly opened my eyes. You see, with every single possible theory on the true name of the D-Clan, we try to come up with something unique and cool that not only sounds great, but has great significance to the story. Names like Demon, Devil, and others that I can't really remember. But the one thing that has the most thing in common out of all of them is that they can't easily unite all of the D-Clan members we've seen in the story. Some are able to unite most, but there isn't one meaning that truly holds the same meaning and symbolism for every single D-Clan character, and that's why it's so tricky to figure out. I mean, let's go through all the D-Clan members themselves to show how difficult it is for connections to be made. First, you've got your good guys like Luffy, Ace, Garp, Dragon, Roger, Rouge, Saul, and if you want to put him in this category, Law. Then you've got your bad guys like Blackbeard and Rocks. You've got some of them who want to be free pirates, some of them who want to rule the world, some who I have no clue how they even made the list, I'm looking at you Rouge, and some who have completely different philosophies in life than one another. All these differences truly make you confused, and if you keep trying to tie certain aspects of their character to one another, we'll never figure it out. So when we go back to a name like Dawn, it wouldn't work for everyone, as there's clear contrast to the name, like Blackbeard for example, who embodies the true ideology, my bad, of darkness, not at all like the sun. So I scratched out the idea of the dawn Oda's referring to being specifically tied to the sun, but it still had to do with Gear 5 somehow, and like a madman, I proceeded to read the Gear 5 chapters in Wano about 50 times. And no, I'm not kidding. I restarted back at 1043 for the 51st time, and then it finally hit me. The drums. The drums of liberation were the key puzzle piece I was missing. It finally all started making sense to me. Drums in One Piece have also been prevalent since the beginning of the series. So I tried to hone in on everything drum related, both in Wano and in the series as a whole. There's obviously the Taicho drums, which we saw at the festival in Wano, which are quite symbolic in Japanese culture, as well as within One Piece lore as well. And there's also the entire arc of Drum Island. So after researching everything drum related in One Piece, I narrowed down my perspective to one drum. And that's the drum sound in One Piece. Every major moment, reveal, crazy event, or just a shocking piece of news that's in the One Piece story, the drum has always been there, with the dramatic sound effect being put in the background of every panel. And that's what drew me even closer, the onomatopoeia for the drum noise. So I looked up what it was in Japanese, and lo and behold, the sound itself is called dawn. But not dawn like D-A-W-N, but spelled D-O-N. Yup, I believe that this is the true name that represents the D-Clan, and that Oda, like usual, is being quite the trickster about it. Rather than outright using dawn, which has already been alluded to having huge symbolism in the One Piece world, this man flipped it, and this version has been in the story since day one. Also, shout out to Arthur at Library of Ohara. I know he made a video on this topic, but there's a lot more that I want to add on the subject. Now, there's a couple definitions for the word dawn, like for a bowl of meat paired with rice, but I want to focus on the other, which is apparently to thump or a boom, like a drum banging for instance. But yet again, I'm sure the question is probably this: well, Prince, how is dawn related to every single D-Clan member? How can they all be connected to one another with just a drum noise? That doesn't make any sense. Well, you guys are right. This thumping sound isn't the true connection for all Will of D members. But the craziest thing is that Oda already gave us the answer, and it goes all the way back to Water 7. I'm sure some of you are already catching on, especially if you're a Frankie fanboy, but for the rest of you, let's take a little trip down memory lane, all the way back to Frankie's flashback to meet one important person. The person who held the secrets to not only the ancient weapon Pluton, but his way of life hid the secret of the Will of D. Let's go back and look at the amazing life of Tom-san. Tom-san was an overall great character, but as many of you know, he had a saying that truly exemplified him as a character, and that saying was to do things with the dawn. Throughout his life, he had this motto to be resolutely proud of the things he's done, the time he's invested, and more importantly, the ships he's created. This will of his was then inherited by Frankie, who was able to directly impact many other characters with his dawn attitude. Now, the most crucial moment we see Tom-san talk about this dawn attitude was when he was proud to be involved with the creation of the Pirate King's ship, and he's right in every way. And after going back to see his will directly, I realized that this moment is the exact definition of dawn that Oda wants to give us. Dawn stands for the idea of being resolute and proud in one's own actions, their will, no matter what it may be, whether that will causes chaos and danger or it's something that spreads good all over. Wills should be resolutely followed with pride and conviction. Now, that's a very interesting definition of the Will of D because it applies to each and every single current Will of D member. So far, we have 10 confirmed Will of D members, and so far from what we know of them, each and every single one is resolutely proud of the wills that they have and their actions towards the world. Let's start off with probably the easiest Will of D members, and that's Luffy, Ace, Roger, and Garp. Luffy is probably the easiest person to see have a dawn attitude, as he's always very headstrong on his decisions, both important and silly, but he knows exactly what he wants to do, and nothing can ever waver his will. Same thing applies to Roger and how he was hell-bent on finding a mythical treasure he didn't even know existed, but he stuck with it and gave us the greatest pirate era in history. We then have Garp, who's amazing at his job as a marine, a true testament of justice, and he's so prideful of his will that he doesn't even take the promotion to Admiral, because he knows that by doing so, he would have to follow the orders of the Celestial Dragons. Talk about willpower. Plus, the whole Marineford arc, he had to stay true to his philosophies in life, even though those same philosophies opposed those of his grandsons, which was obviously very tough for him. Let's move to Ace, who very similarly to Luffy knows exactly what he wants and the actions he needs to do in order to achieve his wishes and will. I mean, who the hell tries to keep killing Whitebeard after failing multiple times, but he still kept doing it to prove his strength? Now, let's move to less obvious Will of D members, but they just as easily have that dawn attitude as the rest of them. Let's get through the least known characters out of those, and that's gotta be Xebec and Rouge. Rox D. Xebec is easily the most mysterious character in recent One Piece history, as the actions of his crew were so heinous that God Valley itself had to be wiped from existence. Now, there's many different theories on how Rox was a wuss and not a strong captain, but we can confirm that those theories are wrong for one reason and one reason only: Kaido's top 6. From what we know, Rox was set out to be the king of the world. According to the Marines, opposed the power of the Celestial Dragons and was in Kaido's top 6 pirates who were put on a pedestal of strength. And the other 5 of the crazy strong pirates include Shanks, Roger, Whitebeard, Odin, and Luffy. Pretty strong people to be compared with if you ask me, so he's most definitely not just some Buggy 2.0, but he had his own resolution and will which he stood by, and thus was erased with God Valley as time went on. Only connection of rocks we see in today's world of One Piece is a very small one which is yet to be explored, but it still exists, and that's the connection with Blackbeard, who we'll get to soon enough. Alright, now let's move to the most random of the bunch, Portugues de Rouge. We all know the story of how Rouge practically sacrificed herself to give birth to Ace, and let me tell you, regular pregnancy is already an insane feat in any world. Now you look at Rouge's 20 months with Ace, and trying to keep her entire pregnancy a secret just to survive, that takes an insane amount of willpower and resolution to one ideal, bringing in the next generation. She may not be a fighter or a grand explorer, but by giving birth to Ace, Rouge showed more than enough proof as to how she is a member of the D-Clan, with proud ambitions and wishes for Ace. Alright, let's dive into some more well-known ambiguous characters now, who've had different paths, but each and every single one exemplifies that Dawn attitude. Those characters are Dragon, Blackbeard, Law, and Saul. And now, let's start off with the fan favorite. Now, although Law is a lot more different than Luffy, his path has always been tied to one D in particular, and that's destruction. As stated by Corazon, Doflamingo, and even Law himself, after losing everything he had in the world, Law sought nothing but to bring the world pain. His conviction and motives were clear, and was proud to bring destruction to anything and everything. Obviously, he changed once he was with Corazon, but even later on in life, after losing another important figure in his life, he was hell-bent on revenge, and his actions were always towards one specific will. We even see Sanji questioning Law's motives once he starts fighting Doflamingo at the bridge to Greenbit. But in Law's mind, he was always going for the kill with Dofi, and never wavered once, which is why he was able to do well to team up with Luffy towards the end of Dressrosa, as their wills and convictions temporarily aligned, taking down Doflamingo. Law may not be as cheery and goofy as the other Will of D clan members, but his actions and decisions have just as much resolution. Next, we have the infamous Blackbeard, who's done so many evil things, so many treacherous acts, but yet such a coward. And I'm sure you're wondering, well Prince, if Blackbeard is a coward, how can he be proud of his actions, or resolute with his will? He's only just an opportunist. And to that I say, look at his main motive throughout the story. If there's one thing that Blackbeard didn't waver from, and kept his pride high whenever achieving it, it's his greed for power. Even after many years of being a son of Whitebeard, after seeing an object he craved because it possessed some crazy power, he broke every rule possible and doubled down. Ace himself said Teach broke the one golden rule on a pirate crew, and that's to not go after your own crewmates. Well, Blackbeard took pride in his position, and he took pride in the fact that he gained so much power, and thus kept his actions going for his inherent will, which is the lust for power. We see him becoming a warlord just to manipulate the world government and gain a more powerful crew. Struck at Whitebeard when the time was right to gain a second devil fruit and even more power. Going after Pudding in order to read poneglyphs, going after Boa Hancock's fruit, and inheriting the will of Roxy Zebek. Blackbeard fulfills his Dawn attitude by continuously going down the same path of darkness, with conviction and clarity. His will in the new world is simple, to gain as much power as possible. Now, let's move on to Saul, and although we might see him soon enough, what we saw during Robin's flashback was more than enough to show how he has a Dawn attitude. It's very simple, to be honest. He honed in on his beliefs, and put everything in his life at stake because of it, which includes his job, and at one moment, his life. But because he was so sure of his own beliefs and had enough conviction to even die for them, he was able to showcase his Dawn attitude. And hey, Oda is now bringing him back during Elbaf, so expect even more to come from our giant Will of D member. Last, but certainly not least, we have Monkey D. Dragon, who, I'm sorry to say, has done nothing in the story yet. I mean, I hope he does soon enough, but it seriously already has been 1081 chapters, and we haven't seen Dragon even move once. But even with all the sitting that he does, his track record is proof enough of his Dawn attitude. The ability to make an entire revolutionary army and guide it against the world nobles is already an extraordinary feat, and because of the time, dedication, and willpower to slowly make his army, Dragon must have needed resolution and conviction in order to do so. In fact, I'd say that he's the character who cannot back down at all. He is the resistance in the world of One Piece. With his moves, the world could possibly be swayed just by his prideful actions alone, acting on what he believes in, which is a just world without the celestial dragons. This may be the reason why Oda has kept him so still for so long, because he knows that once Dragon starts acting, many will follow his path, and this is how he's currently the most dangerous D in the present era, aside from Luffy. He is a direct enemy of the gods. Now, I definitely said that last line for a reason, and it's because it's a perfect way to segue on to the next main point behind the Will of Dawn, and that's how it matches up versus the Celestial Dragons. Let's go back to Corazon and what he was saying specifically, mainly because his statement is a key instrument into identifying what the Will of D is. For people who have the Will of D to be sworn enemies of the gods, it can mean only one thing, right? Everything that they stand for is completely different, and especially in the current world of One Piece, the sworn enemy of the gods are those who openly oppose them, who don't even flinch at the danger that it brings, and they are those who have absolute wills who will stop at nothing to achieve their said wills. Their conviction and unwavering spirit is what separates them from the rest, and if you've been paying any attention to the story, you can see that the most ballsy people that stood up to the Celestial Dragons have this Dawn attitude, and are members of the Will of D clan. We've got Luffy punching a Celestial Dragon, Garp openly being annoyed by them and not caring about their decisions. There's also Rocksteady Zebek and the whole God Valley situation. As time goes on in the One Piece world, we'll see more examples of D clan members going against Celestial Dragons, whether it's in the past or in the future. I mean, even the Gorosei are so scared that people all over the world might be influenced by Luffy's convicted actions throughout the story that by the time he unlocked Gear 5, they didn't even want his new picture or the letter D in his bounty poster. Now, let's move to another aspect which we can see similarities in, and that's Conqueror's Haki. There is some correlation between Will of D members and Conqueror's Haki, as about 40% of the current members have Conqueror's Haki. I'm counting Garp, and if you want to count Dragon and Zebek, that's 60%. Now, if we compare that to the usual metric we see the chances of a Conqueror's Haki user existing, which is 1 in a million people, it's an enormously big difference. If you look at it for what it is, the whole thing makes complete sense. Conqueror's Haki is about having the essence of a conqueror, those who are unwavering to danger, resolute in their own will, and have the qualities to influence their will over others. Now, does that sound quite familiar? Oh right, that's literally what having a Dawn attitude is about. Wow, it's crazy how that just lined up like that. Totally not what I intended at all. Well, believe me when I say this though, this isn't even the craziest reason why the Will of D has to stand for Dawn. Now, this final connection was only revealed to us quite recently, but it's just as telling as everything else. And in fact, it could possibly give us more than we could have ever imagined. And it all starts with a name. An Elder Star's name. That's right, I'm talking about Mr. Saint J. Garcia Saturn. Now, with the world noble's name seemingly having a general Spanish origin like Don Quixote or J. Garcia, I was kinda perplexed, but the names weren't what I was originally concerned with, although it did help narrow down a certain region. The main thing I was interested in was the honorary prefix in Saturn's name, being Saint. Now, it's quite obvious, unless you live under a rock, that Saint refers to someone of holy stature, and that plays perfectly with the theme, seeing that the Gorosei are the highest ranking Celestial Dragons in the world, and Celestial Dragons themselves are seen as gods. But what made me more curious was something I found while researching earlier parts of the video. You see, the word Dawn had many different definitions apart from its Japanese one, but I decided to hone in on a particular definition, one that tells us what the word Dawn's importance is in Spanish. And get this, Dawn is also an honorary prefix, and when I read more into the definition, I was convinced that this is what the Will of D has to stand for. Straight from the beautiful source of Wikipedia, we see that the Dawn honorific is usually abbreviated as just D, and it was used to denote those beings of royalty, nobility, and leaders. Now, let's think back to the One Piece world with this newly found information. We know that there was an ancient kingdom that the world government are so scared of revealing to the world that anything even remotely close to its history has been erased, and we have a bunch of people with D's in their name who the world government wants to hide and not have the D's seen, like they did with Roger's name, and what they tried to do with Luffy after Wano. And if you take the idea of Dons being noted as nobles, royalty, and leaders, the path seems to be quite clear. The D clan were the main people who lived in the ancient kingdom, and the world government, specifically the Gorosei, know this very important detail, and in order to not only maintain their false nobility in the current regime, but to help erase remnants of the ancient kingdom, they've been slyly trying to undermine those who carry the name D. And it has been working fairly well for them until very recently, with Luffy messing up everything for them. Putting all the pieces together, we have the tricky wordplay with Dawn to Dawn, being the banging of a drum in Japanese, always staying with us in the series whenever a grand moment was introduced, to the idea of Dawn in the One Piece world as something done with resolve and conviction, taking pride and having an unwavering will in one's actions, to the uncanny similarities to Conqueror's Haki and the origins of how Dawn was even used in history. I think that with all of that being said, we can confidently theorize that the D that has terrorized the One Piece world stands for Dawn.